Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Now, as you guys may know, I love YouTube animation. It is one of my favorite things to both seek out and enjoy. Whether it be some Adult Swim animation we've watched on this channel, some one-offs that were created by very talented individuals, or some really garbage television that I just eat up like it's a bunch of pancakes. But today we are going to be looking at one of, if not the greatest YouTube animated series to ever grace this platform. No, it's not Charlie the Unicorn. We are talking about Llamas with hats. Because recently, something has happened. A new ending to the 9-year-old show. So, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to lead you through the original series, that being the one created by Jason Steele on FilmCal. Go check out his stuff. It's going to be the links above my links. Give my thoughts and opinions about the show, and then discuss some of the reasons why the show diverged in such a way. Because it gets thoroughly interesting. And we will talk about the epilogue. Make sure to go watch both the complete series. It's about 18 minutes long. And then the epilogue, and it's about 20 minutes. So, 36 minutes for some of the greatest stuff to ever grace YouTube. It's all good with me. But yeah, before we get into it, I want to thank you all for the growth and all that stuff. And if you haven't yet, like, comment, and subscribe. But yeah, let's get into Llamas with Hats by Jason Steele. Llamas with Hats follows Carl and Paul. Paul being sort of the straight man, the audience surrogate, if you will. And Carl being a, how do I put it?
Dangerous sociopath with a long history of violence. Oh. I don't understand how you keep forgetting that.
Episodes 1 through 4 follows their misadventures, such like Carl stabbing a man to death and then eating his hands, toppling a cruise ship and killing a bunch of people, which I want to think it's a Titanic. I think that would have been funny, but that's my headcanon, not yours. Toppling a South American government, and of course nuking the entire world and attempting to cook sliced off faces with said nuke, but they don't really work out. Episode 5 is where we get into something interesting, truly sort of a twist to the narrative that we initially think. That being Carl ripping a portal open in space-time with a bunch of baby hands flying out. That's not the interesting part. Paul is unimpressed, truly. He thought there was going to be something more. In this aspect, we'll come back to it, I promise. But from this point on, we see there's been a shift in ties. There's been a shift in the sort of focal point through their relationships, where instead of Paul being surprised or baffled by the heinous things Carl has done, he's just sort of tired of it all, which then leads us into episode 6, where Carl has decided to make a little, I believe it's either a blood or a meat canal, and then Paul just is done with it all and has packed up a suitcase. I don't know fucking how, because he has llama hands, which are hooves, but he did it. He's just leaving. He's done with it all. He just wants to move on with his life and isn't very impressed by the meat dragon, even though I think it's pretty cool, and I'm upset that we only get to see blurry visuals of it. I think we see it later on in like one of the final episodes, but I think it's cool. Dragon made of meat. But yeah, Paul has officially just left. He's gone, which then leads us into episode 6. Paul is back. Actually, no, he's not. It's just the mask of Paul on a lamb, maybe. And Carl has decided to cut off the faces of local politicians and sew them onto one of those weird hand chairs that you see at Planet Fitness. But of course, the sheep is no replacement for the OG, that being Paul. And he gets tossed in the meat pit, I believe. Or wood chipper, I can't remember. After this, Carl just wants Paul back, and wearing his mask around his neck, because I don't think he can hold the mask, tries to get Paul back into his life by that of swans and a piano. A swano, if you will. After that, Carl goes a bit wackadoo, if you will. He goes a bit delusional because of the lack of friendship, or the lack of Paul calling him out for his bullshit. He props up the mask on a tree and sort of talks to himself, a mirror, if you will, after he just murdered and butchered a man and strewn his body parts around woodland forest. A certain thing I like about this is, even though they're cutting back and forth between the mask and Carl, with Carl doing a voice of Paul, I like how it lingers on him a bit when he switches to the Paul voice, especially how when he does the voice of Paul, he's telling him that he hates Carl. He truly hates him. It holds on him. And then once there's silence, it is broken by Paul's voice. Paul is back, but he's in the mask, like fucking Jason Voorhees or The Mask with Jim Carrey. I don't know if there was a joke there, but I failed at it epically. After this, straight cuts to the next episode, and for some reason, fucking Carl's in a meat pit, his meat pit, broken legs, all that stuff. Now, I will get into the theories about this, because I have some things that I'm thinking about that might be true, might not be true, but I'm just going to toss them at the very end when we get to the end. While he's in the meat pit, the Paul mask talks to him, says that he has unfinished business and he must leave and get the hell out of there. And even though the Paul mask attempts to get him a rope to get out, he can't, which I will bring that up later. After this, we go into episode 11, our nearly before finale, I guess. What is it, the pre-finale or whatever, to which we see Carl weathered, aged, as he has apparently completed everything he needed to. Everything has been built, everything has been eaten, but Paul just wants more and more. After this, Carl realizes realizes that the mask isn't Paul, and he attempts to go visit him, but Paul has been dead this whole time, just a skeleton with his hat remaining. As we pan over the broken society that Carl has caused, the ruined world, we see Carl talk to himself through Paul, switching back and forth until he jumps off a bridge and into the ocean, dying by his own hands, with his hat floating away. Or at least that's how originally it ended, until the epilogue. Now, before we get into my theories and discussing the epilogue of the show, I want to read a document that was put out in about 2015. Now, I had to find this through some weird means. It was initially linked on the Llamas with Hats subreddit by a deleted user, which was brought up because on stream, Jason had apparently talked about it. So I'm just going to read out entirely. If you really don't care about that, skip ahead. So this was titled Llamas with Hats, an explanation. I found this through the Wayback Machine, but I will just read it out in its entirety right now. When the original Llamas with Hats took off and got millions of views, I decided to turn it into a 5-episode series. There are popular shorts of mine that don't really make sense to continue. A Depressed Whale comes to mind, but the comedy duo of Carl and Paul seemed like it could be consistently funny for at least 5 episodes. The plan was to escalate things more and more, with the final episode being the full destruction of Earth. After episode 4 came out, however, everyone had the 5th episode pegged. Most of the comments predicted that the 5th episode would see Carl blowing up the Earth. I was embarrassed that my plan for the series was that predictable. Llamas with Hats isn't as funny if you know exactly what Carl is going to do next. So episode 5 never happened. Llamas with Hats could have gone on forever, like Garfield or the Annoying Orange. Carl would do something bad, and Paul would yell at him over and over again for as long as people would watch. I could have written it well enough to satisfy most people, but it would never have had the same magic as the original episodes. The only way for Carl to continue surprising people was for him to actually do something surprising. A few years ago, I was talking about Llamas with Hats with my partner Scruffy, who never particularly liked the series. Scruffy suggested the llamas should just blow up. This sparked an idea for a legitimately surprising 5th episode. Paul would die, and Carl would have wandered the earth without meaning or purpose, eventually drowning himself in a river. I laughed every time I considered the idea. It was certainly something no one had predicted. It would be like Garfield minus Garfield, but if Jim Davis himself killed off Garfield, which, to interrupt quickly, Garfield minus Garfield? Funny Twitter account. You should go follow it. Good shit. As time went on, the idea evolved. I decided it should take place over a longer period episode instead of just one. Carl's decline, depression, and loneliness should be gradual. What happens to a character who was written as a part of a comedy duo when half of that duo leaves? What meaning does the character's existence have anymore? Episode 5 would set up the problem. Carl's antics can't be shocking anymore. I think I was expecting worse, says Paul. So do people in the comments. Carl opened up a crack in space-time to collect severed baby hands, and people were not surprised. Episode 6 would set up the solution. Paul would leave. What does Costello do if Abbott leaves? How does Costello as a character even make any sense anymore? Episode 7 and 12 would depict the decline. Without Paul, Carl has to make a Paul. He tries putting a Paul mask on an animal. He tries talking to himself with the mask. Eventually he hallucinates that the mask really is Paul. Carl continues doing what he's supposed to do, killing people and destroying things. But the art to his work is gone. Carl does things so that Paul will react to them. Without Paul, he falls apart. And so does the series. It's less funny now. The end music gets more distorted. You must finish your work, says the mask. The mask is Carl's delusion. Carl no longer has meaning in the world he exists in. The work that must be finished is himself. This is all still comedy. You might not find it funny, and I'm sure a lot of people won't. But imagine talking with a friend and they mention Llamas with Hats. They haven't seen any of the episodes beyond the 4th. Now explain to them what happens in the series after that. Oh yeah, Paul leaves Carl, and then Carl spends every episode after that getting more and more depressed before throwing himself off a bridge. Hey, did you see the last season of Friends? Remember when the sun went out and they spent every episode in hopeless despair before freezing to death? Now, I solely read this because I believe it gives context to the series, and I believe it sort of shows us not only how the series had shifted through the artistic ways, through the actual story depiction, but how the author himself had felt about the series, which I give massive respects to Film Cow for doing that shift. I believe it truly adds like an essence to the series, if you will, that it subverts the sort of Tom and Jerry, sort of Mordecai and Rigby shtick, if you will, which I love that shtick in a lot of stuff, you know, having Squidward get pissed off at whatever the hell SpongeBob and Patrick were doing, that's a classic setup. But having the balls to just subvert it like halfway through the series, I think adds loads more than I could ever explain to this masterpiece of a animated cartoon. Now let's get on to my personal theories and takes before we get into the epilogue. Getting into a few of my personal theories, I'm not really going to get into like, oh, how the hell can Carl do this stuff? Because it's sort of just an aspect of cartoon logic, you know? What I'm really going to get into is anything past episode 5 and 6, because this is where I believe the meat of that stuff consists. As we heard through the readings, a lot of that stuff, especially involving Mask, involves Carl's delusions, and I want to expand upon that. I believe in the beginning of these later episodes, Carl knows exactly what he's doing is wrong. He knows this. That's why we get those long, drawn holds on him when when he's talking in Paul's voice about hating Carl, he realizes it gets close to that self-realization that what he's doing is not any form of art. What he's doing is not any of that shit. He's just a fucking monster that he had pushed Paul away from him. Now, as we heard in the readings, the mask is purely delusion. You know, I mean, there's like a magical element if you want to see it that way, but Carl sees Paul's mask as like a real thing. You know, just a replacement of Paul. And at least in my opinion, this is all my speculation. Which then we get into the episode, I believe it is episode 8 or 9, where we open with Carl in the flesh. We see that he's a broken leg and all that, and we're not really given an explanation how he got in there. In my personal opinion, I believe that this was supposed to be his attempt before jumping in the river. That's my personal theory. He wanted to off himself at this point. But then it was sort of the grips of his own insanity that pushed him forward to do everything that needed to be done. And once all the tasks were complete in his mind, what he thought he needed to complete, the mask just kept talking to him. I believe that was like sort of his sense of purpose talking to him. Like that's the only thing that he knows he can do. That's the only thing he thinks he has to do in the world. And then it's finally the grips of seeing Paul's corpse. That's what pushes him that none of this is real. There was no audience entertained through Paul with these constant retorts. It is purely his own delusion, to which then I believe he reattempts what he was trying to do in the meat pit, but this one is fine. At least, in my opinion, it was final until the epilogue. Let's get into it. Now, I know I said I was going to get in the aspect of the epilogue, actually talking about it. Before that, I want to talk about the Kickstarter campaign, which I was a part of. I didn't run the damn thing. I just gave money to it. So yeah, the Kickstarter campaign was started in around April, I believe, of 2024, and had no joke reached its goal in 3 hours. Which pretty damn good. He has a few FAQ sections, or sort of like explanation sections, I guess info sections if you want to say, of why exactly an epilogue is warranted, why he wants to do one, which I'm going to read out the first one and then discuss the other ones. Llamas with Hats is an animated series based around the antics of two hat-wearing llamas, one whom is a murderer. The first episode was released in 2009 and the series dramatically concluded in 2015 after 12 episodes and more than 100 million views. Now years later, we want to bring it back one last time for a surreal, fantastical epilogue. Now, in the why an epilogue section, it sort of just retorts what we were talking about in the long reading. That's why I wanted to do the reading before we got into the epilogue, because it sort of bring back those details that we had talked about in there. I will read the last section though, just because it is new stuff that wasn't originally touched on in the document. I love the arc the series took. Originally I had no plans to ever continue it and considered it a finished work. After the years have gone by, however, the response people have had to the series and its endings has shifted my thinking once again, and an idea bloomed in my head, and I realized the story wasn't over quite yet. Now, how much did I donate? I'm not gonna tell you, but let's just say it was $100. It was $100. I got a bonus at work, and I was like, fuck saving shit. I'm gonna donate my money to this. And actually, personally, I did talk to Mr. Film Cow and stuff. I actually sent him a message on Kickstarter. Now, I want to preface stuff. Usually when I talk to people and stuff with videos, I like to ask them like if I can have their consent to review stuff. I don't do it with like every person just because like a lot of it stuff falls under fair use. A lot of it is really, I mean, it's just fair game, I guess, in my opinion. It's weird to say that. I did send him a DM around June. To sum her up, I was just like, hey, Mr. Steele, I want to do a video about it. And, you know, since it was a major part of my childhood, I basically asked him for his blessing or his consent, you know what I mean? And I was actually surprised that he actually got back to me and stuff. And he said, hello, thank you for asking. Thank you for asking, but you definitely don't need my permission. That falls firmly within fair use. You do have my blessing if you want it though. Good luck with your video, which Film Cow, aka Mr. Steele, if you're watching this, you a G. I'm gonna say that shit. Yeah, essentially what I'm getting with this is at the end of the epilogue, there's a big chunk of section dedicated to the Kickstarter backers, and my name's in there probably around the 19-minute mark. There was a lot of fucking people. There's also a few other things that I'm just gonna bring up now, because if this video does well enough, I want to do a video sort of discussing the stuff I got and sort of like doing like a showcasing of it, because I think it's cool. But also I'm getting like a signed copy of the Llamas with Hats epilogue screenplay, which I think is gonna be neat, and a bunch of other stuff like stickers, signs, all that shit. But yeah, if this video does well enough and there's like a good enough response to this video, I will do a second video unwrapping that stuff. But anyway, enough of that stuff, enough with the halting of stuff. Let's get into the epilogue of Llamas with Hats. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, this is going to be less of a overall discussion of the epilogue and sort of giving my thoughts and feelings on the epilogue as a whole. Once again, go watch it real quick. It's really good. You don't need too much background information from the show. It is very interesting and it's very satisfying if you grew up with the show or have seen the entirety of the show. But yeah, this is going to be less direct because really this one isn't straightforward as the rest of them are. I mean, sort of the latter episodes weren't exactly super straightforward, but this one is even more so altered and weird. The episode, in my opinion, and this is just a theory, I want to preface this, I don't believe this is how it was intended, but in my brain, it makes sense. I believe this entire episode is Carl dying from lack of oxygen going to his brain because he's fucking drowning. That's what I think. This is Carl, like, sort of like the trope, and I don't know if this is a real thing in real life because it's been a while since I asked a dead person. It's Carl merely coming to terms with himself, coming to terms with his own death. And maybe there's something more with that. There's a lot of like symbolism and metaphor and shit throughout this. And I was constantly like on the edge of my seats, metaphorically, not physically, because I have a very small chair. But just my opinion of it, I think this is an interpretation of Carl's brain dying and him sort of coming to terms with the entirety of his life, because as the episode goes on, it gets more and more not only artistic, but it gets more and more sort of non-literal and stuff. We see him getting clasped by two glowing hands and ends up in a void talking to what appears to be a heart coming from a tube, and then he eats the heart tube, and then a lot of cartoon physics stuff happens. And then apparently we get like sort of a prequel, maybe even like sort of an origin, if you will, where apparently the two of them had met because Paul was looking for a pen cap. I don't know entirely if this is what actually happened. This could just be like Carl's own brain twisting shit. But yeah, a lot of this stuff is made through interpretation. We get to see, I believe it's called like the head mountain or face mountain or something like that. And they have a dance off, which by the way, if you donated $250, you could have gotten on there. I didn't decide to do it because I didn't have $250 to spend. If I had it, would I done it? Yes, I would have. From this point, we get sort of more of a self-realization through Carl as he talks to an acorn, to which then it finally leads into realizing that there's no one else to blame but Carl. Once again, this is just my interpretation. I recommend you go see the actual epilogue for that. I could be wrong, but I believe this is finally sort of Carl coming to his end. And once he makes this realization, water starts to pour in. He is finally letting go. He is finally died. He has come to terms, and that he was, in my opinion, he believes he was the worst part of Paul's life. He was the worst part of this timeline he's been involved in through all the mayhem and murder he has caused. And he is finally making the realization that this is how it needs to happen. He needs to let go and let himself die. That's why we see the room filling up with water. His hat continues to float away. And we see an acorn get lost from his hat. That acorn is then planted in soil, grows into a tree. We see a hat go on the moon and a hat go on the tree. Paul and Carl. This is a very extremely loose interpretation of it. I recommend you go see it on yourself. Once again, I mean, you've kind of been spoiled, but go watch it because it's really nice. But this is my interpretation of how it gone, because it's once again an episode where, because the way you can look at episode 12 is that the reason Carl is jumping off is because he doesn't have Paul anymore. He hasn't realized exactly what he's done. He realizes that Paul isn't there and there isn't any meaning, but he hasn't realized that he is truly the cause of everything. He's the cause of every terrible thing that has happened within Paul's life, but also the lives of hundreds or thousands and millions of people. And so this final moment of him releasing and letting go and letting his death occur finally cements the end of Carl and possibly the end of Llamas with Hats. Anyway, let's get to the conclusion. I don't know why I keep trying to have conclusions to this stuff. It doesn't make any fucking sense. But yeah, thank you all for sticking around. If you made it to the end of the episode, type baloney or something like that. I don't know. I'm trying to do that thing I've seen a lot of YouTubers do. But yeah, I just want to give thanks to the people who have been supporting me all this long. It's been really fun doing YouTube. It sounds like I'm quitting. I'm not quitting, I promise. It's just, it's really late and I just want to get this recording done so I can edit it because I'm trying to strike while the iron's hot, I guess. But yeah, I just want to say thanks to Film Kyle, aka Jason Steele, for not only like giving me his lesson stuff, but also making a kick-ass show. Really, it was truly awesome to help fund this project, and I'm excited to see what he does future on, because I really hope this epilogue does really well. Also, Know Your Meme did an article about the epilogue literally 4 hours ago, so fuck. Yeah, I'd recommend go checking out the Catching Up video or the Life is Strange video. I think once again, I don't think the Life is Strange video is at 1,000 yet, but we're getting close. But yeah, goal At 500 subscribers, we're doing face reveal and stuff. But yeah, that's what I still want to reach 500 before the end of the year. So hopefully this video blows up. But yeah, look at watch the announcement video. I talk a bunch of channel updates in there. So yeah, y'all have a good day, good night, good midnight, good midnight. I'll see you all on the next one. Make sure not to die. Bye bye.